If you look at an X-ray of, say, a broken arm, the problem is pretty obvious.
Right, you just see that jagged white line right across the bone.
Exactly. The doctor points to it, they put a cast on it, and well, you're done. But when you try to diagnose the health or the progress of an entire country, that X-ray gets incredibly murky.
Yeah, the lines are never that clean.
No, not at all. And today, we are staring at what might be the most fascinating, just utterly contradictory diagnostic image in modern global development.
It really is. We've brought in a massive stack of United Nations data for this.
Oh yeah, decades of spreadsheets, historical reports, economic indices, all of it focused on one specific Caribbean island nation, which is Barbados. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Glad to be here. And looking at this data, you immediately realize that the standard rules of economic gravity, they just don't seem to apply here.
Right.
We're unpacking something that economists and sociologists are increasingly referring to as the Barbados paradox.
The Barbados paradox, it has a great ring to it.
It does.
Let's lay out the core mission of what we're trying to solve today, because for you listening, this challenges almost everything we are taught about how society is supposed to work.
It completely flips the script.
It really does. How can a country have a female population that is significantly more educated than its male population, boasts a gender development score that puts it at the absolute top tier of the entire world, yet still suffer from a stubborn, massive gender wealth gap?
And, on top of that, how does this same island sustain such a high level of human development without buckling under the sheer environmental pressures of being a geographically constrained rock in the middle of the ocean?
It is just a profound set of contradictions. So the UN has been tracking Barbados across multiple dimensions from 1990 all the way up to 2023.
Right. And we aren't just looking at GDP here. GDP is fine, but we're looking at human capability, inequality, and planetary pressure.
The real human story hidden inside these spreadsheets.
Exactly. My goal today is to help look at the tension between these different measurements, because when you cross-reference how the UN scores their overall development with how they score their gender dynamics and their environmental footprint, the narrative just, it fractures.
Think about what this means for you, the listener. We are told our whole lives that education is the ultimate equalizer, right?
Yep, put the time in, get the degree.
Exactly. You unlock the economic reward. But I want you to keep one question in the back of your mind as we pull apart this data today. What happens to a society when that math just fundamentally breaks down?
Well, we have to start by establishing the baseline, right? Like what the UN actually considers development.
Right, lay the foundation for us.
So if we look at the 2023 data, Barbados sits comfortably in the very high human development tier. Their Human Development Index, or HDI, is 0.811.
And to give that some scale, the global average right now is 0.756. So they are well above the global water level.
Considerably above it, yeah. Now, the HDI, it's a composite score. It doesn't just measure the size of the economy.
Because that would just be GDP.
Right. It blends three dimensions. First, a long and healthy life, which is measured by life expectancy. Second, access to knowledge, measured by years of schooling. And third, a decent standard of living, measured by gross national income per capita.
So health, brains, and wallet.
Exactly. Health, brains, and wallet. And when you average those out over the last 30 years, Barbados has seen incredibly solid growth.
Which is a huge achievement for a small island.
It really is. Back in 1990, their HDI was 0.730. Today, it's 0.811. That's roughly an 11.1% growth over 3 decades.
Wow.
Yeah, and even when you factor in the massive economic earthquake of the 2020 pandemic, where, you see this very sharp dip in their score as global tourism just totally shut down, they rebounded.
Yeah, I saw that in the charts. The score dropped from 0.808 down to 0.803 around 2020 and 2021.
But then they rebounded almost immediately and hit a historical peak in 2023.
Which is amazing.
That rebound is a testament to their institutional resilience. For an island nation heavily reliant on international supply chains and tourism, having your primary economic engine turned off for 2 years is catastrophic.
It's devastating.
But the fact that their human development score recovered and surpassed pre-pandemic levels, that tells us their social safety nets and healthcare infrastructure held firm under immense pressure.
Okay, but I was looking at the historical rankings alongside those raw scores, and this is where the data made me just stop cold.
Oh, the ranking drop.
Yeah. In 1990, with an HDI of 0.730, Barbados was ranked 42nd in the world. They were in the top 28% globally.
Right.
But in 2023, even though they improved their own score by 11%, their global ranking plummeted. They dropped 29 places. They are now ranked 71st out of 203 countries.
And this forces us to distinguish between absolute development and relative competitiveness.
It's like global development is a treadmill, right?
That's a great way to put it.
You can be running faster than you ever have. You know, you've beaten your own personal best by 11%, but the treadmill is speeding up.
Yeah.
If the countries running next to you are suddenly sprinting, your personal best doesn't matter. You are still losing ground in the race.
The treadmill analogy really captures the anxiety of the modern developing state perfectly. In the early 1990s, an HDI of 0.730 was highly competitive.
You are at the front of the pack.
But look at what happened globally over the next 30 years. We saw the rapid industrialization of massive Asian economies, sweeping technological integration, Eastern European nations integrating into the broader European market.
Right.
The global threshold for what constitutes very high development just shifted upward.
So the pie got bigger and everyone else started taking larger slices.
Barbados improved, yes. But relative to the accelerating pace of global tech and industry, its competitive edge dulled. And this brings up a crucial analytical pivot.
Okay, what is it?
If absolute growth isn't enough to secure a country's standing on the world stage, we can't just look at the national average. We have to look under the hood and ask, who is actually driving this growth?
Who is doing the running on this treadmill?
Exactly. Because when you slice this data by gender, the unified picture completely shatters.
It really does. It reveals an anomaly that is incredibly rare in global data.
It is. We have to introduce the Gender Development Index, the GDI.
Which measures the same things.
Yep. This index measures the exact same things as the standard HDI, so health, knowledge, and living standards, but it isolates the disparities between women and men.
Let's lay out the numbers for everyone listening, because they are wild.
Hmm.
In 2023, Barbados had a GDI value of 1.035. That places them at rank 3 in the entire world out of 194 countries.
And it's worth noting that back in 2016, they actually hit rank 1 globally.
#1 in the world. That's huge. But to understand how extreme a score of 1.035 is, we have to look at how the index is balanced, right?
Yeah, so a score of 1.00 represents perfect gender parity.
Dead even.
Dead even. So a score over 1.000 means the balance hasn't just been equalized, it is tipped entirely in the other direction.
Wow.
The Female Human Development Index in Barbados is 0.819. The male HDI is lagging behind at 0.791.
So we aren't just talking about a society that leveled the playing field for women. We're looking at a society where women are statistically dominating the development metric.
Completely dominating.
And the driver behind this inversion, the data point that really anchors this whole paradox, is education.
Specifically, a metric called expected years of schooling.
In 2023, women in Barbados are expected to complete 18.447 years of schooling. Men are expected to complete just 14.809 years.
That is a difference of 3.64 years.
Context is everything here. What does the rest of the world look like?
The 2023 global average gap between men and women in expected years of schooling is practically 0.
Wait, really? 0?
Worldwide, women average 13.06 years, and men average 12.97. It's a difference of less than a tenth of a year.
Okay, so what we are seeing in Barbados is a systemic diversion of paths that is wildly out of step with global norms.
Exactly.
Let's map out what 3.6 years actually looks like in a human life, just to wrap our heads around it. If you start school around age 5, 14.8 years of schooling gets you through high school, maybe a vocational certification or like a year of community college.
Right.
That is the statistical trajectory for a man in Barbados. But 18.4 years, that gets you through high school, through a full 4-year bachelor's degree, and deep into a master's program or professional credentialing.
A 3.6-year gap is an entire university degree. Women in this society are vastly, overwhelmingly more academically prepared than men. They hold almost all the advanced academic credentials.
We talk constantly, and, rightfully so, about the dangers of leaving women behind in education. Entire global NGOs are dedicated to that single issue.
Absolutely.
But the data here forces a really uncomfortable question. What happens to the structure of a society when you leave a massive portion of the male population behind?
Sociologists refer to this as a male education deficit. And, we must be careful here to analyze this neutrally. We're just looking at the source material.
Of course. We aren't taking political sides here, just reporting on what the data shows.
Right. The goal of human development is never to hold women back so men can catch up. The female academic empowerment in Barbados is a massive generational victory.
A huge win.
However, Viewing this through a strictly structural lens, leaving a large demographic of young men academically disenfranchised creates deep socioeconomic vulnerabilities.
Let's talk about the mechanisms causing this. Like, why are 15-year-old boys in Barbados looking at the educational pipeline and deciding to just opt out nearly 4 years earlier than the girls?
It often comes down to the structure of an island economy. In a heavily tourism-dependent and service-based economy, the labor market sends very specific signals to young men.
What kind of signals?
There is often an immediate, tangible allure to entering the workforce early. A 16-year-old boy can drop out of school and immediately start earning cash in construction, transportation, hospitality, or the informal gig economy.
Ah, I see.
The barrier to entry for these roles is low, and the immediate financial reward is highly visible.
So it's the classic battle between immediate cash and delayed gratification.
Precisely. But the academic path requires years of unpaid investment with the hope of a white-collar payoff at the end. For many young men in these specific economic environments, the cultural and economic messaging suggests that manual or service-based entrepreneurship is a faster route to status and independence than, say, a university lecture hall.
While the young women are receiving the exact opposite signal.
Exactly.
They are perhaps recognizing that without those advanced degrees, they won't be able to secure the administrative, managerial, or public sector roles that actually offer stability.
Yes, and this divergence doesn't just affect the labor market. It creates immense friction in social and family dynamics. Think about the sociological concept of assortative mating.
Assortative mating.
Yeah, it's the tendency for people to seek partners with similar educational and socioeconomic backgrounds.
Oh, wow. The marriage market.
When you have a generation of women holding master's degrees, they naturally look for partners with equal earning potential and equal educational standing.
Which makes total sense.
But the math in Barbados simply doesn't allow for it. The pool of eligible men, as defined by traditional socioeconomic matching, shrinks drastically.
Because there just aren't enough men with master's degrees to go around.
Right. This can lead to shifts in household formation, lower marriage rates, and changes in family structures, which then cascade into how the next generation is raised.
So you have a whole generation of women who are highly credentialed, highly capable, and seemingly holding all the cards for the future economy.
On paper, yes.
If you follow the traditional logic of capitalism, you would naturally assume that this massive advantage in educational preparation means women control the wealth of the nation. I mean, if you have the degrees, you get the executive jobs, and you make the real money.
That is the promise of human capital theory. But when we cross-reference the education data with the actual financial data, the pipeline fractures completely.
This is where things get really crazy. We have to look at the income paradox, because degrees are clearly not equaling dollars here. Despite that incredible 3.6-year university-level advantage, women in Barbados face a severe income cliff.
We are looking at the gross national income, or GNI, per capita. And this is measured in 2021 purchasing power parity dollars, just to account for local cost of living.
Okay, lay the numbers on us.
In 2023, the GNI per capita for men was $20,313. The GNI per capita for women was only $14,577.
Wait, $20,300 for men and $14,500 for women.
Female income is roughly 71.7% of male income. Put another way, there is a massive 28.3% gender income gap favoring men. Men are earning significantly more money, despite having significantly less education.
I pictured this as a massive leaky funnel.
A leaky funnel.
Yeah, you pour all this incredible, expensive, time-consuming academic preparation into the top of the funnel. Nearly 18.5 years of schooling for women. The society invests heavily in this human capital.
Right.
But by the time it reaches the bottom of the funnel, where the actual wealth generation, salaries, and economic power sit, all that value is just leaking out. This structural mechanism is broken. How does a man with a high school education statistically out-earn a woman with a master's degree across an entire national average?
It forces us to question the spillover effect. In traditional economics, higher education is supposed to directly and naturally translate into higher earning power and wealth accumulation.
But it isn't happening here.
No. The labor market in Barbados is revealing a stark economic inefficiency. To understand the mechanism behind the leak, we have to look at who is actually participating in the formal economy.
Right. I have the labor force participation rates right here. This tracks the percentage of the population ages 15 and older who are actively working or looking for work.
What do the trends look like?
Well, since 1990, the participation rate has been slowly declining for both genders, which is its own issue, but the gender gap remains incredibly persistent. In 2023, Female labor force participation was 54.7%. Male participation was 62.69%.
So despite women holding the vast majority of advanced academic credentials, a significantly smaller percentage of them are actually operating within the formal labor force compared to men.
But why? I mean, if you spend 18 years in school, why would you sit out of the labor force? Are we talking about a lack of jobs that actually require those degrees, or is the society structurally keeping them out?
It is a combination of systemic barriers.
Yeah.
First, we have to consider unpaid care work.
Right.
Across the globe, women disproportionately shoulder the burden of child-rearing and elder care. If an economy does not provide robust, affordable childcare infrastructure, highly educated women are forced to sideline their careers.
Which means all that educational investment is just sitting dormant at home.
Exactly. But the second, perhaps more insidious mechanism is occupational segregation.
What does that mean in this context?
The labor market is not a pure meritocracy based solely on academic credentials. It rewards specific types of capital, risk, and structural positioning.
So going back to what we discussed earlier, the 16-year-old boy who drops out to start a plumbing business or a small tour operation.
Yes. Men dominate high-paying blue-collar trades, construction, transportation, and certain legacy management tiers that value tenure, networking, and historical capital ownership over fresh academic credentials.
Oh, that makes sense.
A man who owns a fleet of taxis or runs a medium-sized contracting firm will often out-earn a woman who stays in school until she's 24 to get a master's degree in sociology or public administration, simply because of how the market values the ownership of physical assets versus administrative labor.
So women are clustering in the public sector, in teaching, in administration, roles that require high credentials but offer capped salaries, while men are clustering in sectors that require less formal schooling but offer much higher entrepreneurial upside.
And that dynamic is deeply embedded in the historical structures of wealth. The legacy systems of income generation still heavily favor men, regardless of who is currently winning in the classroom.
It's incredibly frustrating data to read. The capability is there, but the economic empowerment is entirely throttled.
It's a huge bottleneck.
But if women are hitting a brick wall in the economic sphere, how are they faring when it comes to formal political power? I mean,
Right.
if you can't get the paycheck you deserve in the private sector, do you try to change the laws instead?
That is exactly where the narrative takes a dynamic turn. Let's look at the share of seats in Parliament held by women.
The historical trend on this spreadsheet is wild. Back in 1990, women held just 1.37% of the seats in Parliament.
Practically zero.
It was practically zero, a total male monopoly on formal political power.
And the progression over the next few decades is really slow. It bumps up to 10% in 1994, then hovers between 17% and 20% through the 2000s and early 2010s.
But then you look at 2018, and the glass ceiling doesn't just crack, it completely shatters.
It really does.
The female share of parliamentary seats jumps to 27.45% in 2018, then to 29.41% the next year, and by 2023, it sits at 32.65%.
At 32.65% is significantly above the 2023 world average of 26.54%. What is crucial to analyze here is the sheer velocity of that change. We see a sudden, compressed burst of female political empowerment.
It's almost as if that massive educational advantage finally reached a critical mass. You have a highly educated demographic that has been historically locked out of peak economic power, so they redirect that capability into organizing, campaigning, and capturing political power.
Highly educated populations invariably demand greater political representation. And the data shows that while economic structures like corporate boards, asset ownership, trade monopolies are incredibly stubborn and slow to change, political representation can shift rapidly when societal consensus reaches a tipping point.
Because voters can change a parliament in a single election cycle.
Exactly. Changing the gender dynamics of corporate wealth takes generations, but an election happens in a day.
This momentum also shows up in the health data, which is, the foundational layer of any human capability. Let's look at maternal mortality.
The maternal mortality ratio for Barbados is excellent. In 2023, it was 39.1 deaths per 100,000 live births.
And to frame that globally for you listening, the world average is a devastating 216 deaths per 100,000.
Wow.
So Barbados is performing miles ahead of the global standard. Their healthcare infrastructure for mothers is a massive success story, reflecting a deep societal investment in female health.
But the data isn't entirely spotless. We have to look at the adolescent birth rate, which tracks births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19.
What's the number there?
It sits at 39.07 in 2023. This tracks almost exactly with the world average of 39.0.
So it's not an acute crisis, but it is a vital point of caution within the data.
Right. When your adolescent birth rate merely matches the global average, it means there is still a vulnerable demographic of young women whose educational and economic trajectories are being derailed early by pregnancy. Not everyone is making it to that 18.4 years of expected schooling.
So we have world-class education for women, excellent maternal health, and booming political representation, but a massive gap in income and labor participation?
It's a mixed bag.
It is. How does the UN ultimately score this contradictory reality? Because earlier we noted that their Gender Development Index, the GDI, was ranked 3 in the world. They are practically at the top of the podium.
Yes, but this introduces the most revealing disconnect in the entire data set. We must look at a different metric, the Gender Inequality Index, or GII.
Okay.
In 2023, Barbados' GII rank is surprisingly low. They're ranked 78th globally.
I need to pause here because the math feels broken again. They are ranked 3 in the Gender Development Index, but rank 78 in the Gender Inequality Index.
Yep.
Aren't these two indices measuring the exact same concept?
These sound similar, but they measure fundamentally different philosophies of human progress. Untangling this difference is the key to understanding the Barbados paradox.
Break it down for us.
So the GDI, where they rank third, measures capability. It measures health, knowledge, and basic living standards. Because Barbadian women live long lives and get nearly 18.5 years of schooling, their capability score naturally goes through the roof.
They possess all the potential a society can offer.
Precisely. But the GII, where they rank 78th, measures empowerment and economic status. It factors in reproductive health, political seats, and crucially, labor market participation and income.
Ah, I see.
So while their political representation is growing, that massive 28% income gap and the low 54% labor force participation act like an anchor.
That is a staggering realization. The GDI shows what women are capable of doing in this society, and the GII shows what the society actually allows them to do with those capabilities.
Capability is maximized, but economic empowerment is throttled. The translation mechanism between the two is broken.
So Barbados is carrying the weight of this massive gender economic inefficiency, but that's not the only inequality eating away at their true potential.
No, it's not.
We have to look at the broader society, which brings us to the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, or the IHDI.
This metric serves as a reality check on that beautiful .811 HDI score we celebrated at the very beginning of our dive.
Right, .811 looks fantastic on a tourism brochure or a government press release, but the UN uses the IHDI to show us the shrinking truth of development. When you apply the IHDI formula to Barbados's data in 2023, that shiny .811 suddenly collapses to a sobering .62A.
That represents an overall loss of 23.55% of their human development achievements. Almost a quarter of their societal progress is essentially erased when you factor in how unequally that progress is distributed.
I try to visualize this structurally. Imagine a towering, beautiful high-rise building on the skyline. That's the .811 HDI. It looks magnificent from a distance.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
But the IHDI acts like a structural engineer conducting an audit. The engineer goes inside and realizes the building is 23% hollow. It looks great from the outside, but when you walk the halls, a quarter of the floors are missing, the plumbing doesn't reach half the apartments, and the elevator only goes to the penthouse.
That audit analogy is exactly how the math works. The standard HDI relies on national averages. It looks at the average income and the average life expectancy.
Right.
But averages are notorious for hiding extremes. If one person in a room has $10 million and 9 people have nothing, the average wealth in that room is $1 million.
The average looks great, but 9 people are starving.
Exactly. The IHDI asks the fundamental question, is this national development actually shared by the population, or is it being hoarded by a select few?
And the data clearly points the finger at the primary culprit causing this 23.5% structural loss. The UN breaks down the coefficient of human inequality into 3 categories. The inequality in education causes a 21.4% loss. The inequality in life expectancy causes a 7.2% loss. But the inequality in income,
What is it?
it causes a staggering 48.98% loss.
Wow. So income inequality is the massive hollow void in the center of your building analogy.
Well,
And this isn't just about men out-earning women anymore. This speaks to a much broader societal stratification, A significant portion of the wealth generated on the island is concentrated in very few hands.
How does that happen in a country with such high education levels?
Well, in island economies heavily reliant on international tourism and foreign investment, wealth concentration is often tied to elite asset ownership.
Like resorts and land.
Exactly. The people who own the beachfront real estate, the luxury resorts, and the import-export logistics networks capture the vast majority of the economic upside.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, the average citizen, even the highly educated ones, is earning a capped salary that doesn't scale with the overall growth of the national GDP.
So the pie gets bigger, but the size of their slice never changes.
Exactly.
It's incredible how these dry spreadsheets can tell such a vivid, frustrating story of structural friction. But, we haven't even touched on the physical reality of Barbados yet.
The environment.
Yeah, they are carrying the heavy burdens of gender inefficiency and wealth inequality. But as an island nation, they face an entirely different existential threat.
The environmental carrying capacity of the island itself.
Yes, the planetary pressures and the invisible environmental bill. Because all of this development, all the universities where women study for 18 years, all the hospitals that keep maternal mortality so low, all the roads and resorts, they don't exist in a vacuum.
No, they don't.
They exist on a tiny, geographically constrained rock surrounded by the ocean.
And achieving very high human development comes at a steep resource cost. To measure this, the UN uses the Planetary Pressure-Adjusted HDI, or PHDI.
Okay, another index.
Yep. This metric adjusts a country's HDI score downward based on two massive factors: its carbon dioxide emissions per capita and its material footprint per capita. It reveals the invisible bill of modern development.
Looking at the data, Barbados has a per capita CO2 emission rate of 4.226 tons in 2023. And historically, it's been even higher, peaking at over 6.3 tons around 2008.
Now, the current world average for CO2 emissions is 4.536 tons. So Barbados is sitting slightly below the global average right now, which sounds like a victory on paper.
All right, below average emissions sounds good.
But we have to understand the unique, unforgiving dilemma of small island developing states, or SIDs.
Right, because they can't exactly build massive, sprawling solar farms in a desert or dam up huge river systems for hydroelectric power.
Island nations rely incredibly heavily on imported resources. To power their electrical grids, they have to ship in fossil fuels across the ocean. To sustain the tourism industries that form the lifeblood of their economies, they rely on global aviation and shipping logistics, which are massively carbon intensive.
Oh, absolutely. Think of all the cruise ships.
Yes. To build out their modern infrastructure, almost every physical good, from steel to concrete to medical equipment, must be imported. They are structurally forced into a high-consumption, high-emission model just to survive in the modern global economy.
So to sustain their 0.811 human development score, they essentially have to burn a lot of carbon. There's an immense material footprint required just to keep the lights on, but there is a deeply cruel, tragic irony to all of this, isn't there?
It is perhaps the defining geopolitical tragedy of the 21st century.
Small island states like Barbados are historically the least responsible for the global climate crisis. I mean, they didn't trigger the Industrial Revolution. They aren't running massive continent-spanning manufacturing hubs or burning coal for 1 billion people. Yet, they are the absolute most vulnerable to the consequences of the emissions created by the rest of the world.
They are on the absolute front lines. Rising sea levels directly threaten their coastal infrastructure. Warming oceans bleach the coral reefs that sustain their fisheries and attract their tourism. And they face increasingly devastating, hypercharged hurricanes.
And despite being the victims of global industrialization, they are now being pressured by international metrics like the PHDI to lower their own footprint.
It's a paradox of geography and global economics. If Barbados drastically cuts its emissions by severely limiting imports or shutting down carbon-intensive tourism, their economy collapses.
Right.
Their HDI would plummet, and all those hard-won gains in education and maternal health would just vanish. But if they maintain the status quo, they contribute to the very planetary pressures that threaten to swallow their island whole.
So how does a country adjust its economy to survive the climate crisis without sacrificing the human development gains it has painstakingly built over the last 30 years?
It is the ultimate tightrope walk over an abyss.
It really is. And it brings us perfectly to the synthesis of this entire deep dive. We've thrown a massive amount of data on the table today.
A lot of numbers.
Let's pull it all together and define the Barbados paradox in its entirety. Based on everything we've analyzed, what are the core contradictions defining this nation's current reality?
The paradox rests on three distinct pillars. Contradiction number one is the education income inversion. You have a society where women are significantly more educated, completing nearly 4 more years of schooling than men, yet they remain economically poorer and less active in the formal labor force.
Contradiction number two is the absolute versus relative miss. Barbados is doing everything right on paper. Their absolute human development score has grown steadily for 3 decades.
Right.
But because the threshold of global development is accelerating faster than they can run, they are actually losing ground in global competitiveness, falling 29 ranks on the world stage.
And contradiction number three is human growth versus planetary reality. They've achieved a very high tier of human development, but it requires balancing on the razor's edge of an island's environmental carrying capacity. Their carbon footprint represents an existential vulnerability in a rapidly changing climate.
So if you are looking at this UN data with an eye toward the future, toward the 2030 vision for global development, what is the policy prescription? How does a country untangle these paradoxes?
The data provides a very clear, albeit incredibly difficult, roadmap. First, equal pay and economic restructuring. The government and private sector must aggressively close that massive 28.3% income gap.
You cannot afford to have your most educated demographic leaking out of the economic funnel.
Exactly. This means creating structural support for women in the workforce, addressing the cultural norms around unpaid care work, and ensuring that high-level academic degrees translate to high-level executive salaries regardless of gender.
Second on the roadmap has to be the male education rescue. You must address the 3.6-year education deficit for men. If you continue to leave an entire generation of young men behind academically, you risk widespread economic disenfranchisement, informal market reliance, and severe social instability.
Right. This might mean revaluing vocational pathways or creating targeted interventions to keep boys in the academic pipeline longer.
And what's the third?
Third is managing the green premium. They must find a way to lower that 4.2-ton carbon footprint without crashing the economic engine. This involves massive, difficult investments in renewable energy microgrids, pivoting towards sustainable, low-impact tourism models, and building infrastructural resilience against extreme weather.
As someone who analyzes global data for a living, what is your ultimate takeaway from this specific case study?
My takeaway is that Barbados is not just a beautiful Caribbean destination. It is a vital, global, living laboratory. For decades, the consensus in international development has been incredibly simplistic. Just build schools and hospitals, get the baseline HDI score up, and the economy will naturally sort itself out into a fair, prosperous society.
But Barbados proves that this is a myth.
The numbers completely dismantle that assumption.
They really do.
Simply increasing education and overall HDI does not automatically solve deep, historical, structural inequalities. The data proves that a society can possess world-class capability, highly educated citizens, and excellent health, yet still suffer from severe constraints on actual human empowerment and environmental security. It forces us to rethink the mechanics of progress entirely.
Which brings me back to the question I asked at the very beginning of this dive. We spend our lives assuming that if we just educate everyone, if we just push years of schooling higher and higher, the economy will naturally reward that effort. It's the great sustaining promise of the modern world.
The inherent promise of human capital.
But looking closely at the murky diagnostic X-ray of Barbados, we have to ask ourselves a really uncomfortable question. Is our global economic system actually designed to reward the most educated and capable people? Or is it just wired to protect the people who have always held the wealth?
That is a powerful reality to sit with.
Next time you hear someone say, education is the only key to success, remember the women of Barbados who have all the keys but are still standing in front of a locked door. Thank you so much for guiding us through this incredibly complex data today. And to everyone tuning in, keep questioning the numbers behind the headlines, keep looking for the paradoxes hidden in the averages, and we will see you on the next deep dive.